Hello and welcome back to the Allan Kardec USA channel, where we discuss the doctrine of Spiritism as codified in his writings by Allan Kardec. In the following series of videos, I will be reading and discussing a book titled The Astral City. So this will be part audiobook and part commentary, where I offer my analysis and views of the writings, and part movie, because video and images will also be added to the reading. To put it simply, the Astral City book was written by a dead person, a spirit by the name of Dr. Andre Luiz, who was once a medical doctor during the time that he was an incarnate human being on Earth. In a sense, Andre Luiz used the hand of a living spirit medium, Francisco Cândido Xavier, also known as Chico Xavier, to write the book. Chico Xavier is considered by the Brazilian people as one of the most beloved men to ever live in his land of Brazil. The Astral City was first published in Brazil in the Portuguese language in the year 1944. I would like to let you know in advance that I made some changes to the book that I will be reading here aloud. Because of the year that the book was written, the original copy translated to English contained a lot of words not commonly used in our current day and age. So aside from fixing quite a bit of grammatical errors in the English translation, I substituted many words with synonym words meaning exactly the same thing, using wordage that most of us today would better understand. A movie based on the book was also released in the year 2010, a film titled Astral City, A Spiritual Journey. Please remember that I will not be discussing the movie. I watched the movie and it was very good, but nowhere near as great as the book. However, even though I will not be talking about the movie, clips from the film will appear during my readings. One final note. You should be able to distinguish the difference between my actual reading of the book and my narrations or commentary, because the recording speed of the readings was increased by about 10%. Therefore, my voice will sound a bit differently from when I offer commentary. Also, during commentary, there won't be any imagery shown. You will see me on the screen. So let us begin with the Astral City. I was under the impression that I had lost all notion of time and space. I was convinced that I no longer belonged to the world of the living. Yet I continued to inhale deep breaths of air. Since when had I become the puppet of irresistible forces? I could not say. I felt like a prisoner, trapped in a dark cage of horror, with my hair on end, my heart thumping uncontrollably, a prey to terrible fear. Many times I shouted like a raving lunatic. I begged for mercy and clamored against the bitter disheartenment which had taken hold of my spirit. But my cries fell only on silence, or were answered by lamenting voices still more moving than my own. At other times, sinister roars of laughter take over the stillness, as if some unknown companion must be close by me, a prisoner of insanity. Diabolical forms, ghastly faces, bestial features crossed my way from time to time, increasing my panic. The scenery, when it was not pitch dark, was bathed in a lurid light, as if shrouded in a thick fog warmed by the sun's rays. Thus I proceeded on that strange journey. To what end? Who could say? I only knew that I kept fleeing. Fright drove me on blindly. Where were my home, wife, and children? I had lost all sense of direction. The fear of the unknown and my dread of darkness had invalidated all my powers of reasoning from the very moment I had broken free of my physical body in the grave. My conscience tormented me. I would have preferred the total absence of reason or non-existence. Abundant tears ran constantly down my cheeks, and only rarely was I blessed with a few minutes of sleep. What rest I had was often interrupted as monstrous beings awoke me and mocked me, and I was obliged to go on fleeing. I saw now that I was on a different plane of life, which rose from the discharges of the earth. But it was too late. Anguish weighed heavily on my mind, and when I started making plans for action, numerous incidents would lead me on to bewildering avenues of thought. Never had the religious question loomed so large before my eyes. Principles, purely political, philosophical, and scientific, now seemed to me of secondary importance to human life. Although they were valuable acquisitions on earth, I had to admit that mankind was not made of transitory generations, but of immortal spirits on their ascension up to a glorious destination. I was beginning to realize the existence of one thing that stands above all that is material or intellectual: faith, a divine manifestation to man. Such an analysis, however, came too late. It is true that I was familiar with the Old Testament and had often read through the Gospels of the New Testament, but I was forced to recognize that I had never searched the sacred writings with the light of my heart. I had embraced the interpretation of writers who were not inclined to sentiments and conscience, and who were, at times, even in open disagreement with the fundamental truths. On other occasions, I had taken a religious point of view, entering voluntarily into a circle of contradictions. In truth, I did not believe that I was a criminal in my life, though my philosophy of living for the immediate present had absorbed me fully. My earthly life, now transformed by death, had been no different from the life of so many others. Born of perhaps excessively generous parents, I had graduated from the university without much effort, and shared the excess and vices of the youth of my time. Later, when I married and started a family, I was blessed with children. I gained a stable and lucrative position, and I was spared all financial worries. Yet, on self-examination, I feel deeply that I had wasted time, and I now hear the silent pains of my conscience. I had lived on earth, enjoyed its benefits, reaped the good things of life, and yet never contributed anything towards the repayment of my heavy spiritual debt. I had completely ignored my parents' generosity and sacrifices, just as I had ignored those of my wife and children. I had selfishly kept my family only to myself. I had been given a happy home and had closed my doors to those seeking help. I had delighted in the joys of my family circle, yet never shared that precious gift with my greater family of human beings. I had neglected to undertake even the most elementary duties of fraternal solidarity. Now that my life was over, I was like a hothouse plant, unable to withstand the weather of the eternal realities. I had not cultivated the divine seeds that the Creator of life had sown in my soul. They were choked by the weeds of my insatiable desire for comfort and enjoyment. I had not trained my faculties for this new life.
It was only right then that I should enter it like a disabled man, thrown into the infinite river of eternity, unable to swim, or like a wretched beggar at the end of his strength, wandering about in the middle of a stormy desert. Oh, dear friends on earth, how many of you may still avoid the bitter road of sorrow by cultivating the inner fields of your heart. Light up your lamp before crossing the threshold of the shadows. Search for truth, lest the truth find you unprepared. Sweat and work hard at it now, lest you weep afterwards.
A lot going on in this first chapter. Dr. Andre Luiz has apparently found himself in a dreadful place, surrounded by many others that appear as if monsters. They are tormenting him, and he doesn't understand why and is constantly fleeing from them. At some point, he realizes that he has been separated from his body and he is no longer on earth. Spiritism teaches us how that is not always the case, as many go on for very long periods of time not knowing that they are dead, which may be the case with many of the diabolical creatures in that place that Andre Luiz has found himself in. That place may be considered one of the many types of purgatory or hell that many of us may find ourselves in. Toward the end of the chapter, Andre Luiz strongly suggests that we seek the truth here while we are still alive on earth about how to avoid ending up in such a place.
Suicidal criminal, infamous wretch. I heard insults from all directions, but where were they coming from? At times I caught glimpses of them as they slipped in and out of the darkness. Through my despair, mustering all my strength, I threw myself against them. In vain I beat my fists at the air in my show of rage. I heard laughter as they vanished again into the shadows. Whom could I turn to for help? I was tortured by hunger and dried up with thirst. The demands of my physical existence on earth continued here. My beard kept growing. My garments were beginning to show the signs of my struggles. Yet the most painful part of my trial was not the pitiful abandon in which I found myself, but the incessant attacks of the evil forces which surrounded me in the darkness. I was unnerved and utterly unable to coordinate my situation, to weigh its causes and establish new currents of thought. But those accusing voices bewildered me beyond my imagination. What are you seeking, you miserable fool? Where are you going, you suicidal wretch? Such accusations, ceaselessly repeated, threw my mind into absolute confusion. I might well be miserable, but suicidal? Never. Those charges are wrong. I had left my body most unwillingly, after a desperate struggle with death. I could still hear the last medical diagnosis at the hospital. I remembered clearly the efficient care and the painful dressings during those weary days that followed my intestinal operation. The recollection of the closing scenes of my earthly days was so vivid that I could even feel the touch of the thermometer and the disagreeable prick of the hypodermic needle. Finally, my last recollection, before my great sleep, my wife, still young, and my 3 children gazing at me in anguish at the prospect of eternal separation. Then afterwards, my awakening to these dreary and damp surroundings, to a never-ending nightmare and flight. Why was I being accused of suicide when I had been forced to give up my hope, my family, and all that I held dear? Even the strongest person must come to the end of their emotional powers of resistance. So it was with me. Firm and resolute at the start, I gradually began to fall into long lapses of depression, and in my total ignorance of the fate in store for me, my usual bravery yielded to hopelessness. More and more frequently, tears welled in my eyes, long pent up in a heavy heart. To whom could I appeal? With all of the sophisticated intellectual culture I had brought from the world, I could do nothing to alter my present situation. Before the infinite, my knowledge was like a tiny soap bubble blown about by the reckless winds of the transformation. Surely I was not out of my senses. I did not feel different. I felt that my conscience was alert and that I was essentially the same man with the same feelings and culture as before. My psychological needs continued unchanged. A gnawing hunger preyed on my every fiber. Yet, in my ever-increasing weakness, I never reached the point of complete exhaustion. Now and then I came across some wild herbs growing along mere trickles of water. I devoured the unfamiliar leaves and drank the water madly. I could stop only a few seconds at a time, for those irresistible forces were ever spurring me on. Oftentimes I tasted the mud by the roadside, recalling with burning tears the daily bread of olden days. Frequently I was obliged to hide from enormous herds of monstrous beings which trampled past me like a band of insatiable beasts. Those were blood-curdling sights. When my despair had almost reached its climax, it began to dawn on me that somewhere a creator of life must exist. The thought seemed to comfort me. I, who in the world had hated all religious creeds, was now feeling the need for spiritual consolation. As a physician who prided himself on his ultra-modern principles of skepticism, so much in vogue in my time, I had to admit that I was a perfect failure. Gone was all the self-importance which had seemed so real to my eyes. I saw now that I had to change my mental attitude. When at last I came to the end of my strength and lay helpless in the mud, unable to rise, I implored that Creator of all things to take pity on me and come to my aid in my desperate predicament. How long did my pleading last? How many hours did I spend praying like a frightened child? It was impossible to say. I only knew that plenty of tears ran down my cheeks, and my whole being seemed to merge into one anguished plea. Had I been utterly abandoned? Was I not also a child of God, although in the whirl of earthly vanities I had never given a thought to God's divine works? I knew the eternal Creator would surely forgive me. Did God not extend that loving care to the birds of the skies and flowers of the field? One must suffer a great deal in order to understand the mysteries of beauty and prayer. One must know remorse, humiliation, and utter misery to fully appreciate the sublime sweetness of hope. It was at that moment that the dense mist all around cleared away, and a person came forward, an envoy from heaven. He was a fatherly old man who bent over me and gazed intently into my face with his large, clear eyes. With a benevolent smile, he said to me, Courage, my son. The Lord has not forgotten you. Heartfelt tears seemed to flood my very soul. I tried to express my grateful relief, to thank him for the consolidation he had brought. Yet I only had the strength to ask, "Who are you, generous messenger of God?" My unexpected helper smiled kindly and replied, "My name is Clarence. I am only a brother." And noticing my exhaustion, he added, "You must keep quiet and calm. It is necessary for you to rest, to restore your strength." He then called on two persons who were waiting attentively and ordered, "Let us provide our friend with first aid." They spread a white sheet on the ground and, using it as an emergency stretcher, prepared to transport me. They lifted me gently. Then Clarence spoke to his assistants. "Let us start without delay. I must reach the Astral City as soon as possible."
We learn something very interesting here about the conditions we may find ourselves in after death. We still feel hunger and thirst for water. A man's hair and beard will continue to grow. It's as if he were still alive, right? The general thinking amongst people on earth who believe in the soul departing the body after death and entering as a spirit into a spiritual sphere is that we should no longer experience those things when we were alive as a human. But that might not always be the case. Dr. Andre Luiz is also very confused as to why those horrible, beastly people around him are accusing him of having committed suicide. He clearly recalls fighting through an illness in the hospital and very much wanting to live. In a future chapter, we will learn why other spirits were saying he committed suicide. Andre Luiz in this chapter describes how the moment had come when he realized that there must, in fact, be a creator of all things. And the power of prayer had dawned on him. He reminds us how strong prayers to God can surely give us hope. He didn't know how long he remained praying, but it eventually worked. As a man he described as a fatherly old gentleman, here known as Clarence, had arrived to assist him and remove him from the horrible world that he was residing in.
As we advanced, I saw from my stretcher the pleasant surroundings which slowly unfolded to my view. Clarence, leaning on a staff made of some luminous substance, stopped before a heavy gate built into a great wall which was covered with a flowery vine. He touched a certain spot in the wall. The gate opened wide, and we entered in a silent procession. A warm glow bathed everything in there. The graceful play of lights in the distance reminded me of a beautiful sunset in springtime. As we proceeded, I saw before me charming buildings and beautiful gardens. At a sign from Clarence, my stretcher was laid down, and in front of us stood an entrance to a great white building similar to an earthly hospital. Two young men in white tunics ran eagerly to my stretcher, moved me into an emergency bed, and carried me in. Before he left, I heard Clarence say, "Take him to the pavilion to the right. I am expected elsewhere now, but I will come to see him in the morning." I gave that generous old man a parting smile of gratitude as I was taken away to a large, pleasant, richly furnished room, and I was laid on a comfortable bed. My heart was overflowing with gratitude towards my kind attendants. I tried to address them, but only managed to ask, "Friends, I beg you, what is this new world that I find myself in? From what star does this bright, invigorating light emanate? One of them laid a tender hand on my forehead, as if I were an old friend, and explained, "We are located in the spiritual spheres close to the earth, and the sun that is shining on us at this moment is the same one that warmed you on earth. However, our visual perception is far keener here. We can see that the star the Lord lighted to guide our activities is far more beautiful than we ever realized while on earth. Our sun is a divine source of life, which has its light source in the Creator of all things." I felt a profound sense of devotion and awe as I gazed at the soft light streaming through my window. I realized that on earth I had never looked up at the sun and raised my thoughts to the one that created it. In God's infinite mercy, it was given to us to shine on our journey. I was like a blind man who, after living so long in darkness, was blessed with the ability to see the splendor of nature. Just then they brought me some stimulating soup and a glass of cool water, refreshing water. The water seemed infused with some divine fluid, for just a little of it quickly produced a reviving effect. The food, whether a soothing nourishment or extraordinary medicine, revived me beyond my expectations. New energies pervaded my entire being, and profound emotions stirred in the depths of my spirit. I ate, unaware of the experience which was soon to follow. I had scarcely finished when heavenly music, soft waves of sound rising to higher spheres, floated into my room. That wonderful melody went straight to my heart. I looked to my attendant for some explanation, and he said, "This is the evening service of the Astral City. Every department of this colony of service dedicated to Christ is attuned with the prayers of the government house. Now stay here in peace. I will return as soon as the service is over." As he prepared to leave, I was suddenly filled with anxiety. "May I go with you?" I pleaded. "You are weak," he explained, "but if you feel that you can." That music had filled me with renewed energies, yet I was barely able to rise from my bed. Aided by my attendant and with faltering steps, I reached the enormous hall where a great assembly was praying in deep, silent concentration. The delicate garlands of flowers which hung from a brilliantly lit dome seemed to form a symbol of higher spirituality. I could hardly contain my feelings of overwhelming surprise. No one seemed to notice my presence. They all looked as if they were waiting for something. I had to make an effort at holding back all of the questions forming in my mind. I quickly noticed in the background an intensely bright light reflected on a giant screen. By some process of advanced television, a marvelous temple appeared on the screen a moment later. In it was the image of a respected old man, dressed in white and sitting in prayer. Around his head was shining a halo of brilliant light. Slightly below him, 72 figures accompanied him in silent prayer. I was surprised to see that Clarence was among them. I was unable to restrain my curiosity. I pulled at my attendant's arm, and he responded, whispering so softly that his words resembled the murmuring of a light breeze. "Keep quiet. All the residences and institutions of the Astral City are praying, along with the governor, through long-distance projection of sound and light. Let us praise the invisible heart of heaven." He had scarcely finished speaking when the 72 figures began singing a sweet and exquisitely beautiful song. As I looked at Clarence, his features seemed to shine with an intense high light. The celestial voices rose in melodious rhythm in a most beautiful song of gratitude. Mysterious vibrations of peace and joy floated in the atmosphere, and as the silvery notes died away, A wonderful heart, blue with golden rays, became visible above us in the same distance. Soft music began, seeming to arise perhaps from the distant spheres, and suddenly we were showered with beautiful blue flowers. Although I could easily see them, I could not grasp those tiny flowers with my hands. On touching our foreheads, they melted away, and at one touch of their fluidical petals, I felt an extraordinary surge of energy, as if some soothing balm had been applied to my heart. As soon as the impressive service was over, I returned to my chamber, tenderly aided by my assistant. I was no longer the ailing patient of a few hours ago. The first collective prayer that I had attended in the Astral City had worked a radical change in me. An unexpected peace filled my soul for the first time in many years of suffering, and my heart, so long empty, was once again filled with hope.
Here we learn how, aside from the spirit still experiencing physical needs such as food and water, and the need to sleep. Can you imagine that? A spirit needing to sleep? We also learn that the spirit sometimes arrives in a place consisting of buildings and other structures, flowers and gardens, furniture and musical instruments. They can see the sky and the sun. We will soon learn how in God's plan, spirits are sometimes transported to a place where all the things they knew on earth continue to exist after death, as a way to gradually adapt to life without the material body and without those material things that we had on earth. It may be difficult to understand how material things can exist in a spirit world. We only need to keep in mind that while nothing seen is actually real per se, it all appears very real to the spirit that is residing there. That will complete the first readings of the Astral City. Please be sure to subscribe so that you are alerted to this channel when the next video in this series is uploaded. My name is Ciso. Have a blessed day.